It is November 18th, 2020, and Election Day was just over 2 weeks ago. Election Day 2020 was November 3rd, 2020, and on that day we started to get results for the presidential election, the House election, and the Senate election. November 3rd is the day when the election results started to come in, but a lot of the results, a lot of the votes weren't reported until many days after November 3rd, and the main reason for that is because of mail-in ballots. Because of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people thought it was too unsafe to vote in person. So they decided to send their vote through the mail. And a lot of states didn't start counting those mail-in ballots until after election day. So a lot of these presidential election races within each state and the Senate elections and the House elections, they weren't able to be properly projected until a few days after election day. And there are still some House races, some congressional races that have not yet been decided yet, that have not been projected to be won by either Republicans or Democrats. And there are around 10 of these congressional districts, 10 congressional districts that have not decided on a winner yet. But regardless, we already have most of the results in. We have 100% of the results in for the presidential election, every single state. Not 100% as in terms of number of votes, but 100% as in we know who's going to win each state. Every single state in the United States and Washington, D.C., they have all been projected to be won by either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. We know which presidential candidate is going to win each state. And with the Senate races, with the exception of the two Senate races in the state of Georgia, that which we won't know the winner of for another month and a half because they are going to runoff elections that are starting in early January. These runoff elections are taking place in early January because none of the candidates in either of these Senate races got more than 50% of the votes, so both of these Senate races have to go to runoff elections. I've already made a video talking about the Georgia runoff elections, so you can watch that if you haven't already after watching this video, but besides the Georgia elections, the Senate races have been decided. Same with the presidential election, but with the House elections, there are still a few congressional districts that have not finished tallying up the votes yet, and they have not been able to project a winner yet. But despite this fact, we already know that Democrats will maintain control over the House of Representatives. Democrats will still have a majority in the House of Representatives after everything is said and done, after all the results are tallied up. But despite the fact that they will still have a majority, they are going to have several seats fewer after January 3rd, 2021 than before that date because there are several congressional seats, several swing districts that Republicans were able to win over Democrats, and Republicans were able to pick up several seats that they previously did not have. So even though Democrats will still have a majority in the House, they won't have as many members as before. So as of now, on November 18th, 2020, even though it has already been over 2 weeks since Election Day, not every single district, not every single congressional district has been decided yet. As of now, 219 congressional districts have been projected to be won by Democrats. According to CNN.com, 206 districts have been projected to be won by Republicans. As of now, this is all according to CNN's projections of these congressional races. So 219 for Democrats, 206 seats for Republicans. But that means that if you add 219 to 206, that is 425. But there are 435 seats in the House of Representatives, which means that there are 10 congressional districts who have not been able to project a winner yet, which means that we will not know the exact number of seats that either party will have in Congress. We're not going to know for a while longer how many seats will Democrats have, and we also won't know for a while longer how many seats exactly Republicans will have. But what we do know for sure at this point is that Democrats aren't going to have as many seats as before. So currently, Democrats have been projected to win around 219 seats. And if you add the 10 districts that have not yet been decided yet, let's say they all go to Democrats. Let's say all 10 of these districts are won by Democrats. Even then, if you add that 10 to 219, that is still only 229 seats for Democrats. And while, yes, that is still a majority and a sort of comfortable one, although the margin is still pretty close in that instance, that is still less than the number of seats they previously had. Because before this election cycle, Democrats held around 232 seats in Congress, in the House of Representatives, I mean. So, no matter what happens at this point, Democrats will have fewer seats afterwards than before. Which means that Republicans actually did better in this House election cycle than Democrats did. Republicans gained seats. As of now, there are 10 seats previously held by Democrats or independents/libertarian. There's one seat that Justin Amash, who is a libertarian, but he's retiring. He previously held that seat, but I guess now that seat will be held by a Republican. Justin Amash used to be a Republican, but pretty recently, I think it was last year, or if not last year, then the year before that, he became an independent candidate. He went from being a libertarian to being an independent. And then earlier this year, he actually became a libertarian because he was planning on running for president under the Libertarian Party, but he eventually decided to drop out of the presidential race soon after he entered, actually. I think a lot of people pressured him to not run in this presidential election cycle because they didn't want him to serve as a spoiler candidate. They didn't want him to take any votes away from either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And by the way, that's one of the biggest issues with the current election system in the United States, the first past the post system. The fact that if you have two candidates who agree on many things, they will split the votes among each other. They will split the votes between each other, and then the candidate that both of them agree with less, they will actually get more votes because all the votes will be consolidated among within that one candidate. So that one candidate ends up winning the election. But that's a video for another time. I've said that for a couple months. I'll make a video on ranked choice voting, but I haven't done it yet. But hopefully I'll do it soon. But getting back to the point of this video, Democrats definitely losing seats, Republicans definitely gaining seats. There are 10 seats that Republicans are going to have that previously they did not have, according to CNN.com. But there are also 3 seats that Republicans, or yeah, 3 seats that Republicans previously had that they no longer will have. And all 3 of these seats were won by Democrats. So the Democrats were able to win over 3 new congressional seats that they did not have before. But then they lost 9 other congressional seats. So in total, Republicans have gained a net 7 seats, Democrats have lost a net 6 seats. The reason why the number isn't the exact same is because Justin Amash is not a Republican, he is a Libertarian. So Democrats losing seats, Republicans gaining seats. The other thing that I would like to point out is that now Republicans in the House of Representatives have gotten more diverse because of their newly won congressional districts in this election cycle, meaning that the Republican Party will have more women in Congress than before, and they will also have more minorities in Congress than before. Historically speaking, at least in the past several decades, the Democrats have always had more women than the Republicans have had, and the Democrats have also always had more minorities than the Republicans have had. This is true for both the electorate as a whole, meaning that women overall are more likely to vote for Democrats and minorities overall are more likely to vote for Democrats. But this is also true for who actually takes public office at the national level, meaning that in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, there are more women who are Democrats than there are who are Republicans, and at the national level in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, there are more minorities who are Democrats than there are who are Republicans. But the Republicans seem to be getting more diverse, both in terms of the electorate that's the portion of the electorate that's voting for them, as well as who actually takes public office as a Republican at the national level. I'm well aware of the fact that Republicans got more Hispanic voters this presidential election cycle than they have in the past. They've also gotten more black voters in this election cycle than they did in the past. One of the reasons why Trump won the state of Florida was because of him gaining more Hispanic voters than other Republicans in the past at the presidential level. And that is also one of the reasons why he almost won the state of Arizona, even though Arizona has consistently been moving towards the left. And that's also one of the reasons why Trump won the state of Texas pretty comfortably. Even though Texas has been consistently becoming more and more liberal, this time around Trump was able to convert a lot of Hispanics to his side. And there were more Hispanics voting for Trump in this presidential election cycle than any other Republican candidate at the presidential level in recent history. So I predicted that the Democrats would win around 5 seats in the House, meaning that after the 2020 election cycle, the Democrats would have around 237 seats in House of Representatives in the House of Representatives. I predicted Democrats would have 237, Republicans would have 198 in my prediction video, but now I realized that prediction was completely off. I thought the Democrats would gain a couple seats, but it appears that they have lost several seats, meaning that my prediction was probably off by around 10 seats, meaning that the Democrats will have 10 seats less than I predicted, and the Republicans will have 10 seats more than I previously predicted, if not more, because it looks like the Democrats will have around maybe 225 seats around there when all is said and done, and the Republicans will have around, I believe, 210 seats when all is said and done, maybe even more than 210. I'm not sure exactly how these 10 congressional districts that have not yet been called, I'm not exactly sure how they will swing, but we're going to have to wait a bit longer for those. All of those congressional districts are really close between the two candidates, and either that or some of these congressional districts are actually going to a runoff election. I know that Louisiana's 5th congressional district they had a sort of election where they had multiple candidates running from both political parties. They had five Republican candidates and four Democratic candidates, and because of that, they do a system where only the top two candidates get to go on to a runoff election, and that runoff election will take place sometime in the next couple months. I'm not sure about the actual date, but in Louisiana's 5th congressional district, the top two contenders for that congressional district's seat, they were both Republicans. So the runoff election for that district will be uh, having one Republican go against another Republican, which will be kind of interesting. But what we do know at this moment is that that seat will definitely be won by a Republican when all is said and done. So that one seat has to do a runoff election, but most of these other congressional districts, they're just too close to call. There's one congressional district in the state of Iowa, Iowa's 2nd district, where the Republican candidate Miller Meeks has only 48 more votes than the Democratic candidate Hart has at this moment. Hart has 196,812 votes, while Miller Meeks has 196,860 votes. So there's only a 48 vote margin there, so it's extremely close. So they're making sure that every single vote gets counted before calling the election. And in that specific congressional district, for some reason, only 89% of the votes are in. But overall, this means that Democrats did not really do well in the House elections. Republicans did surprisingly well in the House elections. And even though they did not gain a majority in the House, this was still a pretty big success for the Republicans because they gained several seats and they overperformed for their expectations. On 538.com, it was projected that Democrats would have around a 96% chance of maintaining a majority in the House, and that ended up being the case. They did maintain a majority in the House. If Democrats had managed to not maintain a majority in the House, I would have been very surprised, because that would have meant something was seriously off with the polling and they were seriously undercounting Republicans. But it turns out that Democrats were still able to hold on to their majority, but they still underperformed because they were given at least a 50% chance of having over 230 seats in the House of Representatives, according to 530.com. But at this point, it is guaranteed they're not going to have that many seats in the House of Representatives, which means that by all metrics, the Democrats definitely underperformed. Republicans definitely overperformed based on what the polls were projecting how well they would do. So, what does this all mean for the House of Representatives in terms of how will they function in the next couple of years? How will the United States government function in the next couple of years? What kinds of decisions will they make? Every single congressional candidate that got elected on November 3rd or afterwards, there are some that still have yet to be elected but will get elected. They will all be serving in the House of Representatives until January of 2023. Their next election will be in November of 2022, but if they lose that election, they won't actually have to leave office until January of 2023. Unless they either retire or pass away before the next election cycle, they will definitely be serving in office until January of 2023. So, what does this all mean? Well, for one, Democrats have less of a majority. Their margin of victory in the House of Representatives, how much control they have, is less now than they did before. Yes, they still have a majority, they still have more members than the Republicans, but that includes some centrist candidates, some moderate candidates. That includes some Democrats who actually agree with the Republicans on many things, and they may be from swing districts. They might have to take some more conservative stances on many issues, and because of that, they're not going to vote for every single piece of legislature that the Democrats pass. So for one, that means that the Democrats have less leverage in the House of Representatives than before, and that also means that the Republicans have more leverage than before because now they have closer to a majority. They still do not have a majority, but they have more control than before, and whenever the Republicans want to pass a bill, they don't have to convert as many Democrats to their side. And the other thing is that the Democrats still don't have a majority in the Senate unless they win both of the seats in Georgia, which is not likely if I'm being honest, but Republicans still have a lot of control in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, while Democrats will now have the presidency. What this means now is that you're a lot more likely to see gridlock in the federal government because the president will be a different political party than the party that controls the Senate. After this election, the Republicans will most likely control the Senate, while Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, will be president of the United States. So you're a lot more likely to see disagreement between the president and the Senate, and that'll mean that there will be a lot more gridlock, which means that it'll be a lot harder for bills to get through because they have to be agreed upon by both the Democratic president and the Republican Senate.